people need to be a good teacher to be able to, you might have all this information. And again, it's similar to if you have all the information, but you can't apply it, you're not going to be able to win at poker. If you have all this information, but you can't instill it into somebody else, then you're not going to be a good teacher. So your student or whatever isn't going to be able to learn that information.
What's up, guys? This is Pete Clark with the return of the Carrot Poker podcast, episode 101. With me today in the Carrot Poker studios is Mark, aka Weazel. He is a streamer, he is a former tournament player, turned cash game specialist these days, and he's going to be talking to us today about, we're going to talk about mainly poker courses and what's good, what's bad with them, what we like, what we don't like, that sort of thing for you guys. Welcome, Weazel. How's it going?
All right, mate. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I have to admit, I've not seen much of your stream, but your avatar is like really distinctly burned into my memory from like playing you in the Zoom pool, I think.
Yeah. We had one fun hand that somebody had mentioned to me.
Oh, go on. Spill the beans on that, because I don't even remember.
You ended up checking the river with Ace Jack, I think, and I think it was a 3-bet pot, and you doubled. I had the nuts, obviously. But it was just a fun hand where I actually went over. I looked at your stream to just see what your thoughts were on it, and it was basically the same as what mine were. Because I didn't know you were streaming. I'd obviously heard your name and seen that you'd done coaching and stuff, but I didn't know you were actually streaming. So
yeah,
that's when I actually realized that you streamed as well and went into your stream.
The chances are, if you ever play a spot against me, I'll be streaming, because I really don't play much poker these days.
Yeah.
Otherwise. So tell us a bit about your background. We're going to get into like the main topic. I know you've been working on reviewing some poker courses and sort of turning your attention to that on your YouTube channel and stuff. But before we get into that, what's your kind of backstory? How'd you get into poker, and how has your poker journey transitioned in the last few years?
Where do I start? From the beginning, I got into poker through playing, little £1 games. Just sort of like sit and goes with my friends when we were younger. So when we were like 16, 17, we used to go to my friend's house, sit in his basement and drink and play, very low stakes.
I think everyone has the same how I got into poker story, and I think it's always that.
Yeah. Well, that's where it comes from, doesn't it? Like, it's the sort of social aspect, having fun. I used to be just a bit of a gambler, a bit of a degenerate, and just really enjoyed poker and just, slowly started getting into it. Mainly played tournaments for the first God knows how many years, on and off. And then when I found streaming, I ended up transitioning to cash games. I dabbled, but I realized when I was playing more cash games over the past couple of years, I was getting more viewers, and it's the content more people wanted to see. Plus there was less, tournaments can be just very, very brutal, whereas cash games more, consistent, I would say.
Yeah.
So, over the past couple of years, been playing cash games a lot more, and growing the stream and such, and here we are today.
I was trying to explain to a friend he's kind of just getting into poker, like what a tournament player's yearly income is like, and he was saying they can make like 6 figures, right? And I was like, sure, but there could be 6 figures difference between their earnings one year and their earnings the next year. It's really, really volatile. Do you have any really degenerate stories from like the other kinds of gambling you used to do before you like sort of calmed down and settled on poker?
Nothing. I never used to think I was that bad, but then if I look back now, I probably was. When I was working part-time, I remember going to the casino with my friend on a Friday night and just did off my entire paycheck in probably about 2 hours. And I couldn't believe what I'd done afterwards. Like, it was just so horrible. We'd gone to play poker, I think, and there was no seats. This is when I was probably 19, one of the first times I've been to the casino, and I think we were sat on the waiting list, and we played roulette or blackjack or something, and just, it wasn't a lot of money like now. I was only part-time, so maybe £300 or something. But that was all the money I had, and it was just did it off so quickly, like just in probably the space of an hour and a half, just an entire month's wage.
Yeah,
I think it was after that when I started to actually start taking poker a bit more seriously, rather than just, gambling. I realized that I didn't want to just do off my money like that. basically. And poker was something that I thought I had an edge at. Even back then when I was terrible, but everyone else was so terrible that I could make money through it. So
Yeah.
I think I started taking it seriously from there.
I remember going to the casino with some mates and playing a poker tourney, and it's like as soon as you busto out of the tourney and your mates haven't, and you're like there in the casino and there's all these other games that you could be playing, and what else are you going to do? Let's drink
Exactly,
and blow your paycheck away. And like I remember my dad phoning me being like, yeah Pete, just calling for a checkup, is everything okay, are you okay for money? Because I was a degenerate in these days, right? I was like 20 years old. Yeah dad, everything's fine, just on the way to the casino to play poker. Oh, just be careful Pete, if you're going to the casino, like don't be stupid. Oh well, yeah, no, it's fine. You sure you don't need any money? No, I don't need any money. Like fucking spoiled kid, right? Then like 2 hours later, hi dad, it's me. I just remembered there's this council tax bill that I hadn't paid yet, that I need to pay, because I'd basically gone and spent like 500 quid and had to make up some ridiculous blatant lie just to try and like get the money back off of him. Like, I think we've all gone through that phase.
That's good to know. It makes me feel a bit better.
Oh yeah, we've all been there, and it's hard though, like, isn't it, when you're transitioning? I was talking to a new student this morning actually in our team coaching program who kind of has struggled for a long time, like with the sort of gambly side of the game, like coming at poker as someone who used to, I don't know, maybe you could say borderline have a gambling problem or didn't have the best discipline in that sense. Did that carry over into your poker game? And if so, like what were the repercussions of that when you took up poker more seriously?
I mean, for sure, yeah. When I first started, I would just play, I didn't start with a bankroll or anything. I just put whatever money I could afford into PKR, it was back when that was still going, and just do it off in a weekend or whatever. I'd play because I was a gambler. I never wanted to play the low stakes, so I wouldn't play the micros. I wouldn't play like $1 tournaments. I'd play deposit £100, which is probably all I could afford, and then play like $20-$30 tournaments, and most of the time just brick every weekend sort of thing.
Yeah.
And as I started to take it seriously, I realized I couldn't do that, but I still didn't want to play the lower stakes. I think that a lot of poker players, they come from not necessarily two separate backgrounds, but a lot of people get into it because of the gambling side, and some people get into it from, the strategy side. And I was obviously the gambling degenerate side of things. So.
Yeah.
But I ended up getting pretty fortunate, I think, in a spot where I think it was a free roll that I had on PKR. It was one where, like a loyalty free roll, like they used to have on Stars. And I won that for $500. And then when I had $500 in my account, I was like, okay, I'll take this seriously and use this as, as a bankroll and see if I can spin this up without, just depositing and just being a degenerate and just doing it off. So I took that $500, used that as a bankroll and played within my means, and then managed to span that up. And that was the point where I started to take it seriously and, didn't want to do that money off because I didn't want to have to deposit again. So that was the turning point where I was like, okay, well, if I just use this and take this seriously, then, I won't have to deposit and lose any more money. I can just use this sort of thing.
It's interesting psychologically, isn't it? 'Cause it's like, because you had a bankroll that was now like a meaningful kind of nest egg or whatnot, it was like now worth protecting and like almost like forced you to grow up in a sense, maybe.
Yeah, for sure, definitely.
I remember having like a $1,400 bankroll when I was young and standing outside a bar in Edinburgh on like a Friday night and bragging to some guy that was smoking outside that I had made this money, had made $1,400 from poker. I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. It's like, yeah bro, all from sitting goes, yeah, you play poker? Yeah, made $1,400 this month.
Exactly. I did something, did you have an MSN Messenger? Did you use MSN?
Oh yeah, man, that was like my whole love life for like a long time.
Exactly, yeah. But the first deep run I got in a tournament, I think I came something like 4 for like $240 or something. And I must have like, done off a lot more than that because, I'd just play every weekend and just lose every weekend, maybe $100 or something. But I got this score and I remember just posting it to everybody in MSN. Just came 4th in this tournament for $200 and something. Didn't matter to me that I was probably 1K down over the whole time I've been playing. I just got this one score and just wanted to brag to everyone about it.
I phoned up my ex-girlfriend, she was my girlfriend at the time, after winning 400 quid in like some Busto Glasgow 20 quid tournament and bragged about it and ranted and raved about it. And she was like very unresponsive and she was like half asleep. And then the next day it transpired that her dad had just died, but she was like half asleep and didn't want to talk to me about it at that point. And I'd phoned up and bragged about this tournament. Yeah. I never bragged about a poker tournament after
I was
that.
just going to say, you're probably not going to brag after that, are you?
No,
Right.
I was kind of like, shit, it really doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, it's 400.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it
for sure.
but it feels at the time, like when you're a guy with no bankroll, right, it feels like such a huge score. It's almost like, have you ever had the impression that money in your poker account or money in a PT4 graph is more valuable than money in your pocket that you would get from a job?
Yeah, definitely. Especially when I was starting out.
Yeah. It's like your babies, right? You don't want to you want to build them up. You don't want anything bad to happen to them. So how have you found moving over to cash games then? What were the sort of fundamental differences that you noticed?
I mean, nowadays it's tougher. I did play a little bit back on PKR back in the day. I was just sort of punting around. I never really. It took me a while to get the strategy differences. In tournaments, I just played basically, especially on the PKR because it was so soft, just very like exploitative. I knew all the players because it was relatively small fields. I would just play based on whoever I had at the table. Hand selection could just be completely different depending on what table and who I'm playing against.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when I was playing cash games, I tried playing the same sort of junk hands, if you will, and realized that I was just getting punished. So for the first, I think I started at like 50 NL because of this sort of gambling side, I couldn't take very low stakes seriously. So I couldn't take, 10 NL seriously because losing $10, it wouldn't bother me. So if somebody jammed the river and I had some sort of bluff catcher, I'd probably just call every time because I just think, sod it, if I lose, I lose $10.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really care. So, I played probably 50 NL and was losing over the first maybe 50K, 100K hands or so. And couldn't really understand why I was losing because, I was crushing tournaments, just absolutely owning everyone because it was so soft. And I was, trying to play the same style and realized that I had to, do a lot of differences in cash games and actually try and work out, what I should be doing in these games. So I was losing originally. And obviously with the amount of information there is now over the past however many years, I started to study a bit more. I think I got to a point where I just wasn't studying for anything, for any sort of poker. I just couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
It wasn't that I thought I was the best or anything. I just couldn't be bothered doing it. And it was only, maybe 3 years ago I realized actually, games are very tough now. I'm going to have to put my head down and start learning again, basically.
It really creeps up on you, doesn't it, when you've not studied for a while and then you just suddenly realize that it's almost like it's like being at the airport, there's like the little flat ramps that people go on with the baggage and it makes you sort of go faster, right, to your destination down the airport, and you're like not studying, you're like walking along beside these people that are just on this like kind of whatever you call that thing, the conveyor belt, right?
Very good analogy, yeah. Definitely.
That's how I feel when I don't study for a while. I'm like, shit, this guy's now like way further ahead than he was. Like all my notes are invalid. He's now playing a totally different game and he's way more solid than he was. Yeah. Cool. So how much did you sort of, obviously like crushing tournaments, soft games, PKR, you didn't really need to like embrace the objectivity of poker, like the theory of it so much. So to what extent did you stick to your exploitative roots when you moved over to cash? And to what extent did you adopt to like a more foundational theoretical strategy?
I mean, I still like to exploit. I still think that, that is the best way to go in general. Obviously, if I'm playing against just a load of rags, I'll just try and just play a GTO-based approach. I tried to learn, once I started realizing what GTO is and stuff, I tried to learn that approach and, have it put into my game as such, but I still think that people are missing out so much if they're not exploiting or deviating because, people are coming to the stream. What winds me up, I don't mind people, people chat pro, and to an extent, I don't mind it if they come in with advice or think, could you do this? But they'll come in and say, oh, this isn't this, it's this. And they'll say it's 100% this.
Yeah.
Like, you have to do this with this hand.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not what poker is. Like,
No.
It's more so now I understand it and what GTO is, but it's people's coming in saying you can't do this. And it's like, or why have you done this? Like, you should open this hand, or you should 3-bet this hand, or fold this hand. And I'll do it for, a reason. It's not just, I understand ranges, obviously, from 10, 12 years of playing poker. I know what I can open and what I shouldn't be opening. And then people will just assume that because I haven't opened 10 jack off in the cutoff or whatever, that I'm just, that I'm wrong, they're right, and they want to play this exact GTO, approach and just ignore whatever else is happening at the table, ignore the dynamics, ignore, whatever's going on. So I still try to exploit, as best I can. But streaming is kind of, if anything, I play very different on and off stream. Mainly, I'll play different games when I'm off stream. But on stream, I just try and stick to a relatively GTO approach, just to make everyone happy, really. And the fact, obviously, being on stream, people can see how I play, so it's easier trying to adapt to,
it's like
approach.
Like a reg having every, like, imagine like Poke had seen every hand Negreanu played, but not the other way around. The heads up match would have been much worse for Negreanu, like in that sense. So streamers, we do have to be kind of careful. I think like my style is so like I'll start theoretically and I'll just exploit if I feel like it anyway, that I have an easy time just doing that on stream. But was it hard for you, like given that you were so in the habit of playing exploitatively, to sort of, I don't know, when you started realizing what GTO was and stuff like that, did you find it like did you want to reject it at first, or were you happy just sort of being like, okay, this is something I can embrace, but I don't have to use all the time? Because like someone asked me on stream earlier, like, is it GTO or is it exploit? It's the stupidest question ever, right? It doesn't even make sense. It's like saying, and I came up with another one of my wacko analogies, and I said, well, what do you like best, socks or shoes? And it's kind of like, well, if I'm in the house, I want socks, right? But if I'm outside, the shoes are probably more important. So it's kind of like, it's that dumb of a question, isn't it, really, where there's no right or wrong answer. And this comes up time and time again, and I just don't understand why anyone wants it to be a dichotomy between these two things. I think it's just, like you said very well yourself, you just play, you have a solid base game, and you very, very often exploit, because exploiting is very, very often the best play. But I'd say for new players, right, what do you think about somebody new who's not very good at exploiting, who's not very good at understanding how the pool reads, and maybe makes big assumptions that aren't true? Like, are they better off just learning some theory first before they go down that road, do you think? Or what would your advice be to other players coming over from tournaments that are less experienced than you, that don't have that 11 years of, street fighting poker behind them?
Yeah, I'd say that getting, even if it's not necessarily a GTO based, strategy, just understanding the fundamentals of poker, before, and just getting, some sort of solid ranges or whatever, so they're not making, the early mistakes. But, exploiting is hard effectively. I think you're definitely right. I always say, I do these little strategy videos, and I review people's sessions, and people make these ridiculous assumptions, be like, no one folds here, or no one bluffs here, or whatever. And, to some extent, I understand what they're saying, definitely correct in some sense, that, probably less people bluff in a certain spot than, in other spots. But to, just having that just assumption in just one spot just means that they hear that.
Yep.
And then they just be like, okay, well, I can't bluff here, or I can't call here, or whatever. And, if someone's recognizing that, then they're just going to get exploited themselves. Ridiculous that the assumptions people will make, just you can't bluff at these stakes and stuff. It's absolutely wild. So I think that having just, if they just were to play GTO, if they could, understand it and replicate it, that's the problem as well. I think that people don't, even if they learn the information, they're not going to be able to apply it in real time.
Yeah, because people don't really learn they don't learn a toolkit enough, do they? They learn more like, in this spot do X, and it's like really kind of broad stroke rules that just aren't, I guess the rules are like both too specific and too general at the same time to be useful. Like, people will be like, oh, blocker, blah, 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 and it'll be like an insufficient thing, and it will be true what they're saying, but it's not enough to make the play the best line, because there's some other fundamental objective facet of that spot that's just true in reality that they're missing, that's maybe more takes precedence or should take precedence. So yeah, I think people are, it's really hard. There's just a lot of road traps, roadblocks, there's a lot of hazards, a lot of pitfalls awaiting poker players, and part of this podcast is to sort of take people who are not that experienced, maybe the same level as a lot of, my students or your students or whatever, and sort of guide them step by step and make sure that we're only telling them things that are true. Because like you said, Weazel, things echo, right? So when I say to a student, no one bluffs here, I'm actually warping that guy's mind in a very dangerous way, right? Because he's going to take that statement, he's going to hear the echo of it, and he's going to apply it in some other spot where it's completely false. Because played a hand earlier today on stream, I've got what have I got? 9-7 suited in the small blind, and it open against a random fish who's not got much money, and the flop comes Jack 7-3. Yeah, Jack 7-3 two-tone, and I've got 9-7. What's your plan on the flop? Do you care what you do here? Do you bet? Do you check?
If we're against It's just going to depend. It's going to depend on a lot of factors and who the player is. But I think either's fine in general.
Yep. So I think the solver would like check a bit more. But I wouldn't see like a big EV difference between betting small and checking. So my line of reasoning here is generally that if I bet, it's kind of hard for like a bad player. Like this is an exploitative line, right? Like it's kind of hard for a fish to make too many mistakes if I bet a third. Like I'm betting second pair for 1/3 pot. How does he really butcher against that? Like how does he go super wrong against that, right? It's just going to fold the bottom of his range and then fine. But if I check and his range is massively wide because he's some whale, the propensity for him to overbluff here is like enormous, right? So I just kind of check this spot like religiously against unknown recreationals. That's just kind of my approach. And then he bets, and then I check call a turn, which is a brick, and he bets, and then river goes check check. And he's got 4 deuce off. And it's like, well, you know, when people have all these combos of 4 deuce off, do we really want to take that echo of they never bluff and apply it in that spot? Because that's hellishly dangerous, right? That's just like crazy. That's like you're accusing someone of over bluffing where they're probably of under bluffing where they're probably over bluffing. But anyway, yeah, I think what you said is very true, that people need to be super careful about these absurdly general claims and absurdly strong claims. If your claim is both very strong and very general, it's probably false. Right, let's talk more about what kind of things people should look for then, because let's face it, as you said, we're in the era where people are drowning in information. You do not have to look very far to find training content in 2021. In fact, it's hard to avoid it, right? It feels like it's everywhere. You're bombarded by it. What are some good elements people should look for in a course, first of all, and then what are some things that might be red flags that might, because I know you're going to start working on course recommendations soon. So what would be pros and cons? What are positives? What are general negatives without, you know, naming any names or getting into any specific courses just yet?
I mean, it's really tough. I think that, first of all, if someone is to choose to get a course or, you know, or coaching or whatever, I think that people have to be relatively honest with themselves, first of all. So in the respect of, there's a lot of information out there and everyone can get this information, but if you cannot understand it and, you know, be able to apply it in real time in a given situation, it's not going to do much for you. It's, you know, the same information's out there. I saw a post on Reddit, for example. I've been on the poker Reddit just trying to get some exposure there. And somebody saying they bought all these courses, but they spent probably £2,000 or something total, and they're still losing at 5NL or something.
Yeah.
And, you know, it might just be a case of this person cannot understand and retain that information and then apply it. It's, you know, back in school, everybody learns the same information, but some people do better in exams because they can retain that information and apply it in an examination, which, you know, effectively playing poker would be the exam in this instance.
It's a great analogy.
I think that enough people aren't really being honest with themselves. They see poker and they just think, oh yeah, this is an easy way to make money. And now it's just not. Like, if I didn't get into poker when it was soft, when, you know, I came from the, like I say, the gambling side of it, now it's so very strategic and it's almost like, well, academic, like in the way that there's a lot to learn, that I don't think that everyone is going to be able to benefit from courses anyway. So it's hard to say what's going to be good and what's going to be bad in a course. I think that you'd have to look out for, I always say, for example, there was I don't want to say student because I'm not really a coach. I just review sessions for free on Twitch just because it's a good way for me to get exposure. People like the content. And
I mean, you're an educator. You're an educational streamer.
Yeah. So a friend of mine, Chris, who I was doing a review session for, he'd had a coach, and this coach is sort of known in the poker community. I know him. And he was very, very good at poker. Don't get me wrong, very good at poker. But he was just a rubbish coach. He didn't really make the time for him. And even when he did, he wasn't, you know, he wasn't a good teacher, effectively. And I think people say to me, you know, do you do coaching or who's a good coach? And I think that any course or anything, you'd have to, people need to be a good teacher to be able to, you know, you might have all this information. And again, it's similar to if you have all the information, but you can't apply it, you're not going to be able to win at poker. If you have all this information, but you can't instill it into somebody else, then you're not going to be a good teacher. So your student or whatever isn't going to be able to learn that information, depending on, you know, how they learn and stuff as well. So something I would like in a course is looking at some courses that I've looked at, you know, it's just a lot of theoretical information, it's hard for me or anyone, I think, to take that information and be able to do something with it effectively. It's just information there. Whereas I think a course should be more maybe interactive or visual, depending on how people learn. You know, people learn in different ways. And I think a lot of people for something like poker would learn in a more practical environment where they're shown examples, or, you know, they're given certain spots and they have to do something themselves in it, rather than just, you know, somebody talking and saying, here's the information, go and do it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know, it's pretty difficult. From what I've seen so far, it's also hard for me to be objective about it, because I know a lot of the information that I'm seeing. So it's hard for me to think, I have to try and put myself in the shoes of not knowing anything about poker, and then think, okay, would I benefit from this course if I didn't know anything? You know, is there any information here that's valuable to me as someone that knows a lot? And more importantly, would it be valuable to me if I knew nothing, sort of thing?
Yeah, I think
it's kind of difficult, but that's what I'm going to try and explore ideally. And, you know, just I haven't seen many videos comparing any courses. There's been loads of people in the stream that come and ask, you know, what course did you learn? Who's your coach or whatever? And I've just, you know, I've played for 12 years. It's mainly come from experience, but I'd like to see if we can, you know, see if I can put something out there where, you know, there's a broad overview at least of, you know, what's good in terms of, you know, coaching and information.
Yeah, I think it's a good gap in the market to fill, actually. I'm glad that you're doing this, because like you say, there's not many people that do that, and it's just so easy to be, you know, drawn in by the propaganda, the marketing of a certain course, and just think, oh, this is amazing, and buy it. Like the amount of chess opening courses I've bought I'd never use, for example, is just insane. And poker is equally academic these days. Like you say, you need something rigorous, and you need something that is, you know, comprehensive, but you also need something that's not taught in a stale manner. I've always found, like when I did philosophy at uni, I always found the lectures, that way of teaching, like here's 12 lectures where you get taught that, then you got to go and do an exam, very bizarre. It was just so much receptive learning. There were hardly any tutorials, and it's like, well, that's kind of why I set up the Carrot Poker School, right? Like my school that I'm running right now is that we can actually have interactive lectures where we discuss seminars, if you will, on a topic with prep done before and homework done after. We've got essays to hold you accountable, not essays, sorry, assignments, coursework, I mean, to hold the student accountable. And then you've got an end of course exam. And if you don't pass that, you don't get the certificate on the Discord. You've done the course, you've maybe gained something from it, but you do not get that badge on the Discord server to say that you are of a level that you can use this information and produce it for yourself. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to get people to reproduce the information, because I don't think you can truly say you comprehend something unless you can sort of reproduce it in a different way, in your own words, in your own language, in your own time. Yep.
Agreed.
And the Carrot Poker course will be starting. There's one coming on April 12th. So guys, look into that, and Weazel, I'll get you some footage of that so you can review that along with your other courses and say it's better than all of them, obviously. Yeah.
I'm a little excited, honestly. So if I can get the other ones, like, you know, I'd seen your From the Ground Up course over on whatever it is.
Run-a-Hunts, yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to review that one anyway, just because it seems like a, you know, quite easy, basic, cheap one.
Yeah.
And then obviously when I spoke to you, you were saying that you know, you have this. I didn't really know anything about, you know, you and what you offer in terms of coaching and stuff like that. And just reading the brochure on it, I'm actually quite excited to, you know, just check it out and see what it's about, because even before, you know, I spoke to you, I think that is the best way of learning, something more interactive, something more practical. You know, people just, like you say, like at a university, I didn't go myself, but that kind of just sitting in a lecture, getting this information, that's no use to me effectively. Like, you know, and I know for a lot of people it's going to be the same. So I think that if they just get a course and it's just somebody talking and it's not practical, it's not interactive, it's not even visual, they don't have good examples, I just don't think they'll be able to benefit from it.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's like, you could just Google that yourself. Like, you can find poker information easily. That's not a struggle. No one is winning at poker because they have access to information that others don't. Just like nobody wins in, you know, A-level exams, for example, because they have access to different information. Nobody has, you know, oh yeah, this guy's course came out on A-level math, so I got an A. Like, no, it's just that they did better with the information they were given. or they worked in a better way, or they worked with others, or they worked interactively, or they had a tutor. Interactive one-to-ones are hugely nourishing for learning anything, I would say. But that said, one-to-one is expensive, right? Like a course is much more economical. And originally when I made the Carrot Poker School, I thought this will be a good way of like taking on students in bulk. Like this will be good financially. It's a good business decision. But at the same time, I think it's actually really good in an altruistic way for the student as well, because they get that peer interaction. I think like working with others is so important as well, and like discussing in their study group. Every course will have its own sub Discord group. And yeah, you're welcome to drop in on one of those and see how it works as well when you're doing your review. Did you find working with other poker players, like have you always networked with other players and talked hands and stuff like that? Was that a big part of your development?
For sure. When I first started, that was the only thing I did. So I was on, again, this was back on PKR. I was on PKR forums, and you could post a hand or something like that. And I remember when I started, I was asking a lot of questions and getting a lot of answers. And then by the end of it, I was doing a lot of the answers sort of thing. It was the only way I improved, or the main way I improved at least back then, was other than experience and actually just playing, it was talking to other people about hands. And I still think now that that's just so overlooked. People want to get a coach and stuff. I always try and say the reason why I do these strategy videos and stuff is there's a lot of free information out there. People are willing to spend whatever on a coach or a course, and there's still this free information out there that they can get. And there's still people that you can talk to. In my Discord, I've got a hand history section. You can post a hand there, people give you advice on it, and if you don't understand, you could always ask that person why you'd be doing such a thing, and then you might get a broader understanding of maybe the fundamentals of poker, or the fundamentals of betting, for example, or why we should check and stuff like that. And I think that definitely, if it wasn't for speaking to other people, there's no way I'd be where I am today. Absolutely no way. I think even now it's still just so overlooked that just people don't do it. They'll get some information, like get a course or whatever and watch it, but then don't speak to others about hands and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, Sauce was like posting on my hands when I was coming up the ranks, and I was playing like 25 NL and as Flop Turn River, the community back in the day, where all these guys hung out, and he was like, I guess, relatively unknown at the time, but obviously like an extremely talented player. And he would just sort of give out free advice, and it was called the Beginner's Circle in this forum where people were posting like 50 NL hands, and that place was like I would almost describe it as a talent hotbed, the number of strong players that came out of there. I don't know if you've heard about like, okay, so like a talent hotbed would be like, there's like Chinese violinists, for example, are all really good, or Russian female tennis players. There's like these categories of talent, right, that pop up when the conditions are just right. It's almost like if you set all the inputs and all the parameters to be right, talent just thrives in en masse. And Flop Turn River was such a place where you had open-minded, discursive interaction, you had a laugh, you had community, and I try and run my Discord in the same way. Like it's all a laugh and it's all really friendly and silly, but at the same time there's like dead serious learning going on, because I think humans, we learn best when we're stimulated, happy, and where it's dynamic. We don't learn stuck in a room, staring at a screen on our own, poring over some extremely difficult theory. That is not how people learn. So what are some things then that would be pitfalls for people buying courses? Like you mentioned as well, you mentioned already people that can't teach. I think that's extremely important. It's a huge mistake to buy coaching based on somebody's graph. I think that is like one of the biggest pitfalls. What other things about courses could you say would you not like or not recommend? What formats, what kind of styles do you think don't work?
Again, it's hard to say. Generally, it's just whoever's buying the course just has to be honest with themselves in terms of how they learn, or if they're going to be able to retain the information and apply it. And we go back to this. Just if they can't get the information, if they can't utilize that information, then it's just going to be of no use to them. And I think that people, they just assume that you've got to be of a certain intelligence. And I don't mean to toot my own horn or anything like that and say that, I'm really clever or anything, but I think that there's people out there that aren't going to be able to utilize this information if they're not, like we say, it's quite academic now, poker these days. So if you cannot do that, then no, I don't think any course is going to be useful unless it's more interactive. Like I say, I think that it should be have some practical examples, and more visual examples as well, rather than just say a lot of text or just somebody repeating a lot of things, sort of thing. So I think that's going to be, I'm still to look into quite a few of the courses and whatnot. So I don't have a complete broad view of what's out there yet. So I'm hoping to see something that's gonna, make me go, oh wow, okay, this is really good. At the minute, a lot of the courses that I've seen are just, they're all very similar. They're all very basic. It's just somebody on a solver putting in spots, brief explanation.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's going to be good enough for people.
Yeah, it's a very easy, lazy video format to make, and take this from me as a video producer on a contract. Like if I'm running out of time one day and I've got to throw together a video, there's always that temptation to just be like, Pio, blah 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 blah, let me rant for 45 minutes, done, give me my money, right? But it's not. I'm aware that it's not the best way to teach, and that's why I'm always like, there's this part of my brain that's just like guilt tripping me, and it's like, no, you've got to make a PowerPoint, you've got to draw like funny characters, you've got to make bright colors, because these things may seem childish or might seem like they're not relevant in such an academic field, but that's how humans learn. We don't learn by processing text or listening to like an hour's worth of audio. We learn by being stimulated. Yeah,
agreed. And I have to say that the video I checked out for the of yours on the Run It Once, just the first video is free to watch for anyone online.
Yeah.
Just I'd seen that you'd use analogies in it. There's like 2 analogies that you used. One for equity with like the poker pie or something. Mm-hmm. And I think that really helps people learn, or it does with me. It's more of a real life example where you can take something and not apply it, but you can see something in a more real life term.
Yeah.
And that for me, for sure, helps me to learn. And this is, if I go back to saying about, my friend Chris's coach, that I can't imagine he was doing these things because I can't imagine he was a good teacher. Absolute crusher of a player. Mm-hmm. And, obviously, I think that if anyone's to do coaching or something like that, is take it more seriously. It's not like in any other, industry, somebody would play professionally and then coach on the side. Like you wouldn't see a professional football player, coaching on the side or whatever. It just they should take it seriously as a craft. And
absolutely,
I think it's something I might want to get into in the future.
Yeah.
But I think that if someone's just playing and you go, okay, yeah, we'll get this guy as a coach and he's playing for a living and just sort of teaching on the side, half-assed.
Yeah.
It's just there's just no way it can be worth the money.
It's a different disciplines, absolutely. Like teaching is not about knowing more than your student. That's a given. That's a prerequisite for teaching. It's not a skill in teaching. It's not a means of teaching. It's just something it's just a box that should be checked. Just like having a car should be checked to like drive down from Scotland to England, right? You can't drive down without a car, but that's not like any kind of bragging right or thing that makes you better at that than anyone else. That's a really terrible analogy. I wanted to like set myself up as the king of analogies here and be like, yeah, I use analogies, and then I come out with the worst.
Car to be a delivery driver.
Better, much better. Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm in Scotland, you're in England. Yeah, that's obvious. It's a bit shit. But yeah, like I think analogy, like why does analogy work when it's done well? It works like socks and shoes, for example. Like why does that work for GTO and exploitative? It works because we're not having to create new neural binds, right? Like new neural connections. We're not having to bind neurons all from scratch. We're taking a mental route in your head that's well established, neurologically speaking, already. You understand socks and you understand shoes and you understand that they work in different realms. So if you want to go all like neuroscientist on this or like psychiatrist on this, I think what's happening here is we're cheating. Instead of building a whole new neural network, we're taking one that already exists and sort of tracing its outline in poker. It's a really powerful tool. And if you don't teach via imagery and you don't teach by making things relatable to where the student is, what are you going to do? And that's hard in a course, right? It's easier in one-to-one, because if you're my student one-to-one, I can be like, okay, this Weazel guy, like, he didn't get me to bet the river when I had ace-jack, so he must suck. This is where he is, right? And I can I'm just kidding. I can figure out where you are, right? Like, as a poker player, and I can attack that in terms of teaching. It's like exploiting someone. If I know what you do wrong in poker, I can exploit you, but I can also coach you really well, right? But it's the same skill. I have to understand that. And that's what bad courses and bad teachers don't do well. I think they don't put themselves in the shoes of the student and see the world from their vantage point. There's no point in rambling about a solver output to an audience that barely understands any of the reasons that behind EV in the grand scheme.
Agreed.
I was going to move on now and talk about solvers a little bit, because you sort of mentioned that one of your pet peeves, it sounds like, is this like, here's a pile output, look how smart I am, I know all these things about it, now you can go and do that, like, can you hell? Is there a way to make solver output more digestible? What do you think about trainers, for example? Have you like messed about with any of them, and is that something you'd recommend?
A little bit, yeah. I don't do much stuff with solvers myself. I have GTO Plus. I've used it. I use it every now and then, sort of thing. A lot of the time, I find it very solver outputs are very intuitive anyway. For me, from playing for so
Sure.
long,
Yeah.
I've never plugged a spot into a solver and it's told me to do something completely different. It's all quite intuitive. Obviously, that comes from me who's played for so long that it's quite intuitive.
You understand EV, right? So you understand the objective nuts and bolts of poker, but you've done that through touch, like through exploration.
Yeah.
And then the solver's kind of giving you from the top down bird's eye view of it, which you've already figured out from the bottom up. So this is like kind of a cool dichotomy between bottom up learning and top down learning, right? And I think you have to do both. But go on. So like, how do we take that solver output for someone that's not versed in the game like you, and how do we get them to really feel that new material like with a passion, and get them to like interact with it and get them to use it on their own, rather than just like sort of zombie, looking at somebody teaching it?
It's just, you just got to get this person to understand the reasons why, as opposed to just what it's doing. You can't just look at a spot and be like, you should do this, because it's easy to get it wrong. For example, if it's like a similar spot or whatever, it's not about what it's doing, it's the reasons why it's doing it.
Yeah.
And just understanding those those fundamentals of why we're betting, the theory of betting, why we should be betting in relation to EV, and different sizes and stuff, why we'd be betting certain hands with small sizes, why we'd be betting with big sizes, blah blah blah. Understanding range and range advantage and stuff like that. It's more just the theory behind it as opposed to what it's actually doing.
Yeah.
So the reason I would say I don't do a lot with solvers is because a lot of the time it's going to take a similar line to me, or I'm going to take a similar line to it, I should say. Not because I'm a GTO wizard or anything like that, but just because I've played for so long and I've adopted this sort of GTO style, and so I sort of, because I know the fundamentals of it and I have the understanding behind why we're doing things, I can apply it to spots that I've not put into a solver. That every now and then I'll put one in. I put one in with for a spot that when I was reviewing someone else's hand, because I found it interesting, where I thought, oh, maybe we could call, raise, or fold. One of those spots on the river.
Yeah, three-way mix. I love those.
Yeah, where it makes sense to do all three things. Put it into the solver. It did say we should just call with the combo we had, fold with a different combo, blah blah blah. But so it wasn't saying we could mix, but even if I don't think that we should necessarily do what the solver says and just call 100%. Just the understanding behind it of why we could call, why we could raise, and why we could fold. The reasons for each of those things. I think that's more important. So again, it's more, if the information's there, they might have the information, but if nobody's telling them the underlying reasons why we're doing things in a solver, why the solver's output is as it is, then again, it's just not going to be very useful to me.
Yeah, and it's not just learning what good reasons are, but I guess by elimination, if you create an exhaustive list of good reasons for betting or raising, for example, you kind of, by default, you rule out all of the bad reasons, is right? If they're not on that list, then you can kind of say that's probably not a good reason for investing. Are there any common reasons that people maybe make bets for, calls for, folds for, whatever you want, really, any kind of investment or non-investment, but make decisions for, that you think are anti-theoretical, like don't have anything to do with EV, misleading? What should people sort of ditch from their poker vocabulary, if there's anything like that?
How do you mean, sorry?
Any sort of reasons or vocab people would use for a play that you think is actually just bad, like bad reasons for doing things. Let's take betting, right? People bet for all kinds of reasons, some of them good, some of them bad. So I guess I'm just wondering, what kind of bad reasons have you heard people bet for that you would maybe eliminate from their game? You'd maybe like tell a a friend or a student not to use that reasoning?
So they'll, things like, obviously, there are benefits to betting, say for protection, for example, or something like that. People will use an example where we might bet for value and protection, and then apply it to just every spot where they have a weak hand, and just want to bet for protection, or one where people want to check raise a hand because they don't really want to face multiple barrels. I've noticed a lot with newer players, they don't like being put in spots, and nobody does. Nobody likes to be put in spots. It is better having the aggression and driving the action. But part of the game, especially being out of position, is going to be being put in these spots, and people will. It's almost intuitive that they'll want to do something, raise or whatever, because or even fold, for example, rather than call down in a tough spot because they don't like being put in that spot. And I think that's human nature, but people will, overdo it in spots where they'll, for example, a protection bet, they'll bet small on a turn or whatever because they want to buy the river, or they want to set their own price. For example, somebody that bet very small 3-way with bottom pair and a flush draw because they wanted to set their own price, and then he got check jammed on, and I was like, well, you didn't set your own price there, did you? You just wasted your equity because he ended up folding with this hand. So I think people make a lot of these assumptions, and especially they just don't want to be put in tough spots. And I think that's what people really need to improve on, really.
I think that's a great one, like kind of picking a reason that's desire based, that like feels better emotionally. I think that's a real hazard. If you're doing something because it puts you in a better emotional place, there's every chance that that's totally irrelevant to expected value, because people have to understand that EV expected value is generated by the sum of many different iterations, like many different things that can happen, and will not just depend on the one thing that stands out in their mind. Like, do you ever feel like people just get kind of skewed towards one part of the game tree that feels gross to them, and they neglect the other parts that feel more mundane? Like checking is a big one. I feel like nobody thinks about checking as like an option. I feel like everyone's like, bet for protection, but they're not going to be like, well, let's check because he can bluff all these hands, because they just don't see being on the receiving end of a bet as a good thing, because it feels like being attacked. But actually, go back to my 9-7 example in the small blind, right, against this random fish. Being on the receiving end of bets when you have second pair is actually much better than being on the aggressing end of bets, right? It's much better to receive the bet when you have a hand that beats lots of bluffs than it is to narrow your opponent's range towards hands that are, towards a range that won't be doing that badly against 9-7, basically. So it's not about how you feel, it's not about the comfort, it's about EV, and training yourself to think in terms of EV and ignoring what feels good or feels bad. Deeply counterintuitive for humans, right? Very difficult. So going back to courses, how does a good course teach EV? Like, such a complex thing, like this expected value, the sum of all these different trials. How does a course actually get that across to a student holistically instead of, just focusing on one side of the argument? Like, it's such a difficult thing to do. How would you do it if you were...
I mean, I honestly, I have no idea. It's, it comes back to just saying the understanding behind everything of why we're doing things, and just trying to get that, that foundation effectively, so people can understand it. It's something that it's very hard for me to comment on, given that, because I've just played for so long, and a lot of it's very intuitive for me now. A lot of it's in just the basic stuff, at least, is just in my what's it called, unconscious competence, where I'm just I just sort of know all these things. And again, it's coming to review these courses and such. What I think I'd plan on doing, if I can, getting somebody that's maybe quite clever, knows a little bit about poker, but not like a good player, and see how useful this information is to them. It's hard to put myself in a spot where I'm looking at something that I already know, and say, how do we get this to somebody that doesn't know? Because I already know. It's hard for me to put myself in that spot. And again, I think a lot of coaches and a lot of the people doing the courses are just spouting this information, just putting that information there, and just hoping the viewer just picks it up and gets it, which I just don't think is gonna.
And it might
happen,
sound good, it might look really good, and it might come across like really advanced and academic and rigorous, but if they can't absorb it and apply it, like, what's the point at the end of the day?
Exactly. It might, there's some of the ones I've looked at, there's very good theoretical information in there. It's very I find some of it very interesting, but it's, as far as I can see, it's not going to have any real practical application for people wanting to improve at the tables.
Yep.
You know, they're not going to be able to take it. Some people will, but I don't think everybody will.
Most people won't. In my experience, like, the number of students that achieve their poker goals is a vast minority, and I think that's not because the goals are too ambitious. I think the goals are fine, but I think the methodology of, like, how the student expects to get from A to B is flawed. I think it's just totally wrong. It's like, I'm going to drive my car across this river to get to the other side. It's like, they've got the wrong vessel for journeying, and I think the vessel that they have is just absorption of material. Like, the number of things I've heard, like I've got students that'll say at the start of the lesson, I'll say, how's poker going? And they'll be like, I watched 19 episodes of this course, I read these 2 books, and I'll just be like, yeah, so you're a worse player now than you were before you did that then, probably. Yeah. It's about application. I'd say 30% absorption, 70% practice. Like, my chess coach just gave me, this is like my thing right now, Weazel. I'm like obsessed with chess, so I'm going to like talk to everybody who will listen about my chess coach that I just hired. But he'll sort of give me very practical exercises to do, and he said, like, don't use chess engine, like, don't use analysis, don't, like, that's the equivalent of the solver in poker, right? Like, the engine telling you which moves are better or whatever. Don't do it. Just sit at a board and work it out for yourself. Set up the wooden pieces on your wooden board, old school. Turn off your technology, set up these 12 positions and solve them. And it's been so eye-opening because I've had to do it. I've had to be the one in the driver's seat. So why don't more poker courses, instead of just being like, blah, here's a wall of information, why don't they go, here's 12 exercises? Why don't we teach poker in a way that quizzes people? Why are we just bombarding them with shit? Is it just because it's an easy way of making money off of them? Probably. But it's not really the best way to teach them. It's not the most ethical way to get them from A to B. So it's something I've been bashing my head off the proverbial brick wall with for a long time, is trying to get all the ideas in my head into their head. And man, I don't think that just because I'm a good poker player means that I can make somebody else a good poker player. It's just so fucking hard. So I hope that when you do this review, you sort of, it'd be cool to see not just which courses are better or worse, but why, right? Like, why is this course good? Why is this one bad? I'm really looking forward to seeing something out there that can guide people in that sense. Let's talk a bit more about you then to wrap up. What are your poker goals this year? What do you hope to achieve? You mentioned moving into coaching. Talk to us more about Weazel's poker future.
Well, this year I've just, I wanted to concentrate on the stream and the content I'm putting out there and stuff. So one of my goals was to make Twitch partner, which I did last week or this
Congrats.
week. Thank you. So pretty happy with that. Really enjoying the streaming side of things. The community that I've built up. I've streamed on and off for 4 or 5 years, just more so in the past 6 months or so. But I'm really enjoying that side of things now. It's just a lot more fun. It's social, especially being in lockdown and whatnot. It's like, for me, it's very social, just having these friends, effectively. Like, I've made friends through it. So my goals have always changed over the years. But when I got into poker, dreamt about winning the World Series, as I'm sure everyone does at one point. Yeah. And then it was, as I focused on cash, it was I wanted to get to the nosebleeds and play the highest stakes and be the biggest crusher. Mm-hmm. Now it's just to get by. And, I'm just very happy in the situation that, as again, going back to being in lockdown and the pandemic and everything, very fortunate. Like, if you do something where it doesn't affect you, if anything, I've thrived. The games have been better. Yeah. There's been more people going to Twitch and stuff like that. So my stream's been able to grow because of it. So I'm just very fortunate in that respect. And as long as I can keep doing this, I'm happy. Yeah. I'd like to maybe move up stakes in the future. Potentially do some other stuff. Maybe go into coaching. That wouldn't be this year, I don't think, anyway. But I don't love the game as much as I used to when I was first getting into it. I used to want to play every second of every day. Yeah. But obviously that was as a technical recreational, whereas now playing for a living, it's a lot less.
Isn't it weird, the inverse relationship between skill level and passion? Sometimes it's almost like the better you get at something, the less you want to do it.
I think it's just as if you get to a professional level at anything, if you're doing it, every day because you're effectively forced to, I just think it becomes less enjoyable anyway, naturally. Yeah. So it's not like I don't enjoy playing poker. If I stopped enjoying it altogether, I would, stop and maybe move on to something else.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, if you're doing something for a living, it's just not going to be, you know, because you're not doing it in your spare time,
Yeah.
you know, as something that you want to do to relax or blow steam off, or, you know, for enjoyment, you know, if you enjoy the competitive element or whatever, then, you know, I think it sort of makes sense. But I still do like it, you know, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I hate it. It's not like I wake up every day and think, ah, shit, I have to go and grind today.
There's probably
But,
easier and less stressful jobs you could do if you were going to settle for doing something you hated, right? There's probably jobs that would
sure,
make
yeah.
you pull your hair out, like poker.
I used to work in retail for years. I don't know how or why. You know, that was stressful, and I hated it. Like, you know, poker is very stressful. Streaming can be pretty stressful. You know, doing both at the same time as well. You know, it can be quite a grind. I've got quite a lot to set up and stuff when I do it, and sticking to a schedule can be quite, you know, rigorous. But compared to, you know, working in retail, which I used to hate and get less money for it, and it was still as stressful. You know, I look back and just think now how fortunate I am to be, you know, in the situation that I'm in. So.
Yeah. Same.
So yeah, no long-term goals of winning the World Series anymore. If it happens, you know, it happens, but we'll see.
It's a lot of elements of poker as well that are very profitable and very fun and very enriching that aren't just grinding. I think, like, for some reason the beginner is like deluded into this idea that when you get good at cards, the only way you can make your life good is by cramming zillions of volume and grinding up the ladder.
Yeah.
Like, I had a guy on my stream today being like, this is personal, and I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you play 100 NL for a living? I was like, I would rather work in a shit job somewhere than play 100 NL online for a living. Like, I would not do it, ever. Because it's just so difficult to play that much poker all year, so isolating, right? So hard with the variance, and just not that profitable compared to other ventures, right? Like the business side of the game, you know, Weazel, you're talking about getting into coaching, you're talking about streaming more. See, all of those things, if you build a brand and you build an empire, like, take it from me, at first it's tough, right? And you have to put a lot of work in, but eventually, when you're well known enough in that field, it's so much more profitable than playing poker. And it makes you enjoy poker again. It makes you enjoy playing again because you don't have to do it for a living. And I think that's, like, been the key for me, that when I did this game for a living, I didn't want to do it, it made me miserable. But when I can just dip in and play on stream and, like, have my business going, man, it's so much better. So I totally get that. I get that whole, like, wanting to expand in other directions with the game, but not just playing cards as your only livelihood. I think that would be a blunder, a business blunder, because I think poker players are businessmen, right? And women, they need to set their own goals, and they can't be too narrow-minded in that I'm just going to grind my way up the ladder and that's all there is to it. I think that would be missing out on a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool, so stay tuned for more from Weazel, guys. Mark, where should they check out your stream? What's your Twitch?
Say again, sorry?
What's your Twitch name? Where do they find your channel?
Weazel_1991, Weazel with a Z. That's across all social media, YouTube and stuff. That's just the brand.
Consistency is good. We'll put the links in the comments. All right, Weazel, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a really cool, enlightening conversation, and I think a lot of people will get tons out of this with respect to how to learn the game better. Have you back on for see how you're doing in the near future, I hope.
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me again.
You're welcome, mate. Take care. All the best.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
Don't cause the darkness, light a flame, change the picture.